My name is Ivy Lancaster, 36 years old, living and working in San Francisco. That morning I had just laid my father to rest. By that afternoon my sister-in-law, who also happened to be my direct supervisor, looked me straight in the eye and said, "From now on, Elara Systems has no room for people who use funerals as an excuse." That sentence, colder than the grave I had just filled, officially ended every illusion I ever held about the family and the company I devoted 12 years of my life to. Have you ever been pushed out of something you helped build simply because they refused to see your true worth? If you've ever been treated like your grief was a burden, leave a comment below. Hit like if this story speaks to you and don't forget to subscribe, because what I uncovered after that blew the entire Lancaster family apart. This story begins on that cold, rainy day on a stone bench at my father's memorial park. The service took place quietly at a small church in the suburbs of Palo Alto, the one my father had visited on his last Sunday mornings before his health gave out. The sky was gray, as if even the heavens were holding silence in memory of a man who built a tech empire from nothing. The pews held a scattered few, some old neighbors, a few friends from his days teaching at Stanford's engineering department. Not a single flower arrangement bore the name Elara Systems. No condolences from the board. And the absence that ached most? My brother Brad, with a voicemail excuse from his assistant. He's traveling with Madeline in Zurich and won't make it back in time. Short, clinical, not even a word of apology. I sat silently next to my mother, gripping her hand as if letting go would cause her to dissolve into the damp chill of the chapel. My father was laid to rest in our family plot, a place he once called a quiet corner in a noisy world. After the last mourner left, I stayed behind, sitting on a wooden bench in the back, my chest tightening with a pressure I couldn't describe. I was kneeling to pick up fallen petals beneath the statue of St. John when a tall man in an earth-toned raincoat approached. His hair was snow-white but his stride firm. He gave a small nod, his gray-blue eyes landing on my face as if searching for something in memory. "Ivy?" he asked, his voice low but not unfamiliar. I nodded, guarded but polite. "Yes. I'm Ivy Lancaster." "Caleb Monroe," he extended his hand. "I was your father's close friend, back in Elara's early days." I paused for a beat. I remembered the name from dinner stories. My father reminiscing about friends who'd launched the company from a tiny garage in San Mateo. But I'd never met him. "I didn't expect to see you here. Your father once told me if the day ever came when he wasn't around, I should give you this." Caleb pulled a light brown envelope from inside his coat. It was sealed with red wax, the handwriting slightly smudged from the fog. I took it, my heart pounding at the sight of that familiar script, neat, slightly left-leaning, unmistakably my father's. Before I could ask, he gently patted my shoulder. "Read it somewhere quiet. And if you need answers, come find me. My office is still at the same old address, 3rd floor, Bristol Building, Emerson Street." Then he turned and walked away without another word. I stood there gripping the envelope as if letting go would send every unspoken word into oblivion. That evening I returned to my 12th floor apartment in North Beach, San Francisco. My mother stayed with my aunt, she needed time to collect herself. The apartment was dark when I entered, only the faint glow of a streetlight spilling through the curtains and stretching across the cold wood floor. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat at the dining table, the envelope catching the dim light. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled back the wax seal, careful, like I was unraveling a secret my father had guarded to the end. Inside was a copy of Elara Systems' original formation agreement, aged, the paper a soft yellow but preserved. On the last page, right after the signature section, a handwritten note stood out. "Amendment to Clause 17B, effective February 5th of last year." I flipped to that clause and my heart sank. In the event that any founder or direct descendant is denied reasonable bereavement or basic familial rights, temporary supervisory and voting control at Elara Systems shall transfer to the heir designated in the identification section, Ivy Lancaster. Below it was my father's signature. And a notarization seal. I read that paragraph over and over. Each word, each period. The language was simple, but the weight behind it hit like a freight train. My father, forced to step down after his first stroke, had prepared a safety raft. Not for himself but for me. No one had ever mentioned this clause. Not in any meeting. Not in any email. Not in any HR document I'd reviewed. I'd always thought of myself as a creative director in name only, a title they kept out of courtesy, not trust. But now I knew, my father never wrote me off. They had. He didn't. I switched on the desk lamp, pulled out my laptop, and began digging through every shareholding document, company structure file, and recent agreement. None included Clause 17B. Had they erased it? Or simply hidden it? Then I checked the date of notarization and my stomach turned. The amendment had been signed 6 months before his death, just days after Madeline had visited him in the hospital with a restructuring file she'd asked him to sign while he was half conscious. I remembered that day vividly. He didn't speak for 3 hours after she left. When I asked why, he just gave a faint smile. Some things are better left for the right moment. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there rereading every word in that contract while the clock ticked like time itself was circling back. And I knew that envelope wasn't just a legal document. It was a doorway to something bigger, something my father had hidden just for me to find. And I also knew, from that moment on, everything would change. The next morning, I returned to the old church where my father had kept a metal box in the private storage room. But I wasn't there to mourn. I was following a growing certainty. What I thought I knew about Alara was only the surface. I called Caleb Monroe from the rear parking lot. He picked up after the second ring, voice steady as always. "You found the clause, didn't you? And I need the rest of the story," I said. He gave me the address of a bank, a worn-out branch of First Meridian Bank in the suburbs of Menlo Park. "Your father left a safety deposit box. No one but you has access. You'll need the code and the key hidden in the basement bookshelf drawer." That afternoon I returned to my childhood home. The place still smelled of old wood, winter wool, and a hint of something like long-held faith. I opened the drawer beneath the bookcase where my father used to keep important things. I had to pull out several hardcover books before I found a small tin box. Inside was a brass key, its top etched with the letters M73, barely legible. I made it to the bank 10 minutes before closing. The manager led me to the back storage section, where rows of deposit boxes sat like sealed memories. I gave him the key and code. He nodded, unlocked the digital dial, and turned the key. The safe clicked open. Inside, no cash, no gold. Just a rosewood box, an old cassette tape, a stack of documents tied with a deep blue ribbon, and an original share agreement bearing Alara's seal from 2006. I laid them out on the private reading table. My hand shook as I untied the ribbon. The documents were cleanly typed, some with my father's handwritten notes, tilted, precise, unchanged over the years. The first page read, "Suspension Shareholding Agreement, Clause for Transfer of Ethical Oversight and Internal Voting Power in Cases of Unjustified Exclusion." I read every line, every note. The clause clearly stated, if a founding member or direct descendant is denied bereavement rights, family rights, or any form of basic human decency by the executive board or board of directors, ethical oversight of the company shall be temporarily transferred to the designated heir. Effective immediately upon verified violation, no approval from remaining parties required. My father's handwriting in the margin read, "Not power, justice." I closed my eyes and clenched my fists to hold back tears. He had seen it coming, and he didn't wait for anyone else to protect me. He laid down an exit route for me in advance, one step at a time. I opened the small wooden box. Inside was an old Panasonic tape recorder. Next to it, a cassette labeled in ballpoint pen, "April Strategy Meeting." I inserted the tape, hit play. A slight static, then a voice. Madeline's voice, clear, sharp like a razor. "I don't care about the funeral," she said, her tone indifferent as if she were discussing staffing changes. "Robert has passed. That doesn't affect the market. We need to announce the IPO roadmap on schedule. If Ivy can't set her emotions aside, then she's not suitable to be present during this phase." A man's voice tried to interject. I assumed the Siva. "Madeline, that's her father. Maybe we should delay." "No," Madeline cut in, cold as ice. "Feelings don't build stock prices. She should learn to separate. I need people who prioritize." I gripped the edge of the chair. In my mind, my voice echoed back, "I don't need priorities. I need basic humanity." The machine stopped. I rewound the final segment, played it again. Every word, every syllable of Madeline's voice hammered itself into my mind. My father had kept the evidence. And he placed it in my hands like a final gift, or more accurately, a weapon. I carefully packed the tape, the documents, locked the safe, and left the bank under the glow of sunset spilling down El Camino Boulevard. As I drove past the Alara Systems headquarters, an 8-story glass tower catching the last amber light, I glanced up at the top floor where Madeline and my brother were likely still in a meeting, still convinced they controlled everything. But they had forgotten one thing. Real power is what others don't know you're holding. And I had just reclaimed all of it. I arrived at Alicia Tran's office on Monday morning, the air still heavy with mist from the night's rain. The red brick building was tucked behind a row of banks and a French bakery, not flashy but solid. Just like Caleb once described her, nothing fancy but sharp enough to silence a room. The glass doors opened into a long hallway with soft gray carpeting, lit by warm hanging lamps that gave a strange sense of reassurance. As I stepped in, Alicia was already waiting behind a spotless ebony desk, holding a steaming cup of Earl Grey. Her gaze didn't probe or welcome, it simply was. "Ivy Lancaster," she said first, her voice laced with a soft Western drawl and the quiet confidence of someone with Asian roots. "Your father once told me, if the day ever comes that Ivy walks into my office unescorted, that's the day I need to start listening." I sat down, opened my leather bag and pulled out the copy of Clause 17B and the digitized audio recording. Alicia took them, reading slowly like she was touching something more important than paper. A moral boundary between right and wrong. "Signed and notarized," she nodded. "And the audio proof?" Madeline's voice. Unmistakable. She didn't need more explanation. She knew how this game was played. And I knew I wasn't stepping into it as someone asking permission, but as someone reclaiming what was rightfully hers. "We'll start by filing an immediate motion to suspend all voting rights from the board," Alicia said, already opening her laptop. "Reason? Executive ethics violation with clear evidence provided by the legal heir." I nodded. "I want to clean it to the root. I'm not here for a chair. I want to know what they've been hiding all along." Alicia looked up, smiling faintly. "Then we begin where it always leaves a trail. Follow the money." That afternoon, I was granted access to the internal archive system I had helped build back when I was Alara's creative director. They thought they revoked my clearance after last year's restructuring. What they forgot was, I designed the encryption. And I never locked myself out. I combed through quarterly spending reports, tax filings, and detailed statements under executive development and strategic leadership training. One recurring entry made me stop. Vision Catalyst Retreat, South Lake Tahoe. The first expense showed up 3 years ago, a modest $12,000, labeled as Leadership Workshop. But starting the second year, the costs skyrocketed, $63,000, then $98,000, and most recently, $145,000. No attached materials, no photos, no performance reports. No verified organizing agency. I forwarded the files to Alicia. She pulled up recipient details. One name appeared, Rhodes Development Initiative. I frowned. Rhodes. That surname sounded familiar. Alicia cross-referenced company records, scanned the tax ID. "Owner, Emily Rhodes," she said, then looked straight at me. "Madeline's maiden name." I leaned back in the chair, a chill running down my spine. "So," I whispered, "she created a shell company and funneled money from Alara to herself? Or to someone she's trying to hide," Alicia corrected, then quickly ran a trace on the transaction accounts. Funds routed through another intermediary, Doyle Kent HR Consulting, contracted by Brad Lancaster. My brother. The one who didn't show up at the funeral. The one who'd gone silent ever since our father passed. I swallowed hard, feeling like every belief I once held was dissolving like paper in water. Alicia laid her hand gently on the folder. "If we go forward, there's no turning back." I looked at her, voice low but firm. "That's exactly why I came." She nodded, her eyes reflecting a respect that didn't need flattery. "I'll prepare a motion for an extended internal audit. We need to replicate this full record set, submit it to corporate ethics with a petition to freeze all transactions linked to Rhodes Development Initiative. Do you think we have enough to stand on?" Alicia gave a quiet smile. Ivy Alara was built on trust. What you have is proof they shattered that foundation. And with this system, if we push just the right brick, the whole wall comes down. I nodded slowly, then stood. In my hands were the reports, the shareholder agreements, the encoded audio file. In my mind, an image of my father hunched over in quiet persistence, writing addendums no one knew existed, trusting that someday I'd know what to do with them. And today I was ready to begin. I spent that evening in my quiet apartment, a silence so complete it felt like the world had stayed outside the door. The case files were backed up into a secured compressed folder by Alicia, innocently titled Training Report under VQ4.zip. But inside, numbers sharp enough to topple a boardroom. I sat in front of my laptop, the faint blue glow casting my reflection onto the glass window. For a long time I simply stared at the Alara internal whistleblower portal icon, a system I helped blueprint when I led the Cultural Innovation Division. Back then I truly believed transparency could be built from within. I logged in using a temporary account. The interface hadn't changed much from the original system I had designed. It was more concise, colder, as if the original sincerity had been swept away by procedure. I selected the Priority Ethical Violation Report option. A form popped up, asking for identity verification or to proceed anonymously. I checked Anonymous, attaching all the files. Unusual payments, fake contracts, Madeline's voice recording, and the notarized Clause 17b. Before hitting send, I reread the title, Report of Executive Misconduct and Internal Fraud, involving Madeline Rhodes and Brad Lancaster. My finger hesitated for a moment on the Enter key. Then I pressed it. The screen immediately displayed, Thank you for your submission. The system has successfully received and encrypted the data. Seconds later, my phone buzzed with an email notification. A confirmation copy has been sent to the Senior Administrator account, ivy.lancaster@alarasystems.com. I froze, my heart sinking. It took a few seconds for me to understand what had just happened. The Administrator account. I immediately accessed the admin portal again. Command lines appeared automatically from memory. I typed the code sequence known only to my father and me. A control panel appeared, not a user dashboard but a system-level console. Full root access, login history, data permissions, board activity logs, server security reports, all displayed before me. I leaned back in my chair, breath held as if unable to believe what I was seeing. They had removed me from the company a year ago via an unsigned internal memo, no official termination paperwork. And throughout that entire time, they never revoked my admin privileges. A fundamental oversight. But one that those who think they've won often make. I opened the deep-level folder, Executive Activity Logs. There I found transaction records from the past 3 months. Files named, Initiative under Wellness under .xx, Team Dev Roads under Confidential.pdf, Q1 under Retreat under Payments.docs. I opened each file, scrutinizing every dollar. They hadn't been careful. They thought power let them bypass every technical rule. But real power is when you write the system they're using. I uploaded the new documents into the Anonymous Vault, a second data tier I had designed for emergency reports with undisclosed identity. That layer had never been touched, because no one but my father and I knew it existed. I renamed the report file, OrionGate.pdf. That name was a secret code between my father and me, from a distant night when he told me about the Orion star he used to navigate by as a child. When lost, just look up, he said. And remember, justice never gets lost if you keep your heart straight. A system alert sounded, data forwarded to Alara Ethics Board, Priority Level 1. I closed my laptop but didn't stand. I sat there a long time, fingers lightly gripping the edge of the table, eyes gazing out at the distant streetlights. In that moment I didn't feel triumphant or afraid. Just one clear feeling, I was no longer being pushed out. I was at the center. And what was coming next wasn't a confrontation, but a reminder that I had never left the game. I was only waiting for the right moment to reset the board. At 8 a.m., I entered the Alara Systems lobby on the 20th floor where the quarterly board meeting was scheduled. No one greeted me. A few glanced over then quickly looked away as if my presence thickened the air. The conference room was surrounded by glass walls, overlooking the misty Palo Alto hills. Madeline sat at the head of the table wearing an ivory blazer, her blonde hair perfectly pinned back. She was speaking in a calm, measured tone I had heard before. I believe with the new restructuring roadmap, we can increase next quarter's profits by at least 11%, while reducing personnel pressure by merging two operational divisions. The door was still open, but no one noticed I stepped in. I didn't sit right away, just observed. The document in my hand, the legally certified copy of Clause 17B, had been delivered to those who needed to see it earlier. Less than 2 minutes later, the opposite door swung open. A man with salt and pepper hair entered, carrying a brown leather briefcase and wearing a no-nonsense expression. All eyes turned to him. David Grayson, Senior Legal Counsel for the Elara Shareholders Board. Madeline stopped speaking. She raised an eyebrow but kept her usual composed voice. David? The meeting hasn't reached the legal section yet. I'm afraid it just has. He opened the briefcase, pulled out a stack of documents sealed with a red stamp, and handed them to the nearby secretary. By order of the board, I am to read these aloud. The room fell almost silent. I stepped in calmly and took a seat by the window. Madeline saw me. Her face didn't change color, but her throat moved slightly as if swallowing something hard to swallow. David looked around and spoke firmly. According to Clause 17B of the Elara Systems Founding Shareholder Agreement, effective February 5, signed by Robert Lancaster and notarized by Monroe Hill Law Office, voting rights and internal ethical oversight shall automatically transfer to the legal heir, Ivy Lancaster, in the event of any unjust exclusion involving basic family rights. A young executive across the table whispered, "You mean, Ivy was never removed from founding rights?" David nodded. She remains a founding shareholder and the sole valid heir within the company's internal power distribution. I reached into my bag, took out the original notarized copy, and gently slid it onto the center of the table. No words needed. Madeline said nothing for a few seconds. Then she let out a short laugh, devoid of warmth. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "That agreement has never been recorded in any recent financial report. It is not binding." David opened the next file. "This is the audio recording of the internal strategy meeting on April 17th, clearly capturing statements from the current CEO, MS. Madeline Rhodes, regarding denial of bereavement rights to MS. Ivy Lancaster, as well as prioritizing financial market interests over the legitimate personal rights of a founding shareholder. This satisfies the transfer condition in Clause 17B. Murmurs rose around the table. Madeline clenched her fists on the chair arms, eyes throwing cold daggers at me. I didn't look back at her. I just glanced at my brother, Brad, who raised a glass but put it down before drinking. His face was pale, struggling to stay composed. David continued. Additionally, a preliminary investigation initiated by the corporate ethics system uncovered unusual expenses from the Team Welfare Fund, under the name of COO Brad Lancaster. Specifically, in the past 10 months, this fund spent over $200,000 on a series of services unrelated to personnel development, including the ownership and maintenance costs of a red Ferrari Portofino, registered as his personal asset. I looked at Brad. He avoided my gaze. "I can explain." A board member interrupted. "How do you explain using company funds to buy a sports car, Brad?" No one laughed. No one argued. Madeline stood, placing both hands on the table, voice tense like a drawn bow. "All of this is being blown out of proportion. The restructuring is for the common good. And I don't believe letting family emotions influence decisions is the right path." I kept my tone steady, no louder than necessary. Family is not about emotions. It's the foundation. And when someone tramples on it for personal gain, that's no longer leadership. That's theft. No one responded. They didn't need to. The atmosphere in the room said it all. David glanced around one last time. "I am authorized to call a special meeting to reassess the leadership structure. Until the board makes a final decision, Madeline Rhodes's voting rights will be temporarily frozen. Transactions from the welfare fund accounts will be locked pending internal audit results." His voice didn't waver. But I knew his words were just the opening salvo for the storm to come. And I was sitting exactly where I needed to be. I returned to Alicia's office late afternoon, carrying a file recently transferred from Elara's internal legal system. Though it was dark outside, the hallway lights were still on, casting a warm golden glow on the mahogany floor, giving the space a solemn yet intense feeling. Alicia stood by the whiteboard holding a black marker, sketching diagrams of financial relationships based on yesterday's data. Arrows pointed from Alara to a series of independent consulting firms, then looping through a chain of trust accounts in the Bahamas, all funneling down to one name, Emily Rhodes. "I've confirmed the personal ID linked to a bank account in Grand Cayman," she said as I entered. "It belongs to someone named Emily Rhodes. Born in 1982. Passport issued by the state of Illinois." I paused. Illinois. Exactly. But there's no record of her in the federal citizen database. I was silent. The name Emily Rhodes wasn't unfamiliar. It was Madeline's maiden name, a fact barely mentioned in her family biography, hidden so well hardly anyone noticed. "She used her maiden name to create a completely new financial entity," Alicia continued, her eyes sharp. "All payments from Alara to shell companies have been funneled into this account over the past 3 years, totaling $11.4 million. I stepped closer to the board, my eyes resting on the last red-circled node. She wasn't just embezzling. She had long prepared a legal escape route, a fully valid parallel identity, at least on paper. Alicia opened her laptop and played an encrypted audio file. "An anonymous accounting staffer sent this morning, but the IP trace shows it was accessed from Alara's headquarters." The audio crackled faintly at first, then a man's shaky mid-aged voice came through. I'm not sure this is legitimate, Madeline." Madeline's voice responded coldly. "I don't need you to be sure. I need your signature. This is the HR training fund approved by the board. You just sign on the last line. The rest is on me." The man hesitated. "But the detailed ledger isn't in the documents." "You want to lose your job, George?" Madeline cut in. "How old are you now? 53? You think another tech company would hire a blind accountant with rigid, inflexible records? Sign. Or I'll have HR know you refused to obey the CEO's order." The sound of pen on paper. Silence stretched. Then a chair creaked. The recording ended. I stood still, hand resting on the chair back, feeling the blood in my fingers turn cold. "George worked under my father," I said softly. "He's been at Alara since 1998. My father once said if anyone kept books more accurately than a computer, it was George." Alicia nodded. "And now he's been turned into a tool." I turned toward the window, watching the city lights flicker on. Skyscrapers glimmered like a matrix, but inside each shining block, how many people were threatened just for choosing to do what's right? "We need to protect him," I said. "If he agrees to come forward, this will be undeniable evidence." Alicia didn't answer immediately. She looked at me longer than usual, then quietly nodded. "I'll find a way to approach him. Possibly through his personal lawyer, so the name Ivy Lancaster doesn't appear. But if he cooperates, we'll need to put him under internal witness protection." I clenched my fist. Half anxiety, half anger bottled up for too long. Not just because of money or betrayal, but because Madeline had touched the ultimate taboo, trust from the loyal. Alicia continued compiling documents. The screen's glow reflected softly off her glasses, forming a pale halo. "I'll submit an updated report to the ethics board along with offshore bank account data, transaction copies, and the audio excerpts." "But Ivy..." I looked up. "Are you sure you're ready for what's coming next?" I took a deep breath. "I'm not here to retreat. I'm here to strip away every layer of dust they've placed over the truth. And I'll go all the way." Alicia smiled faintly, no unnecessary words. She knew I wasn't joking. I also knew that from the moment I opened that first letter in my father's handwriting, I had entered a battle with no turning back. Now I had the evidence. A lawyer. The rage of those silenced too long. And I would use the very system they built to put everything back where it belonged. I was waiting for the elevator on the 10th floor when my phone buzzed softly in my pocket. A notification popped up from Monroe Hill Law Office, with a simple subject line: "Court documents, unsealing supplemental will." I didn't open it immediately. Not out of hesitation, but because I had learned to respect my father's timing. Each signature came with its own moment. I slipped my phone into my pocket, stepped into the elevator, and only late that night in my quiet apartment did I open the attachment. The screen lit up, displaying a crisp scanned document typed neatly. At the bottom was my father's signature, steady as the last time I saw him sign the first transfer contract when I was 24. Supplemental Will Amendment, Section 7, Clause C. In the event that Direct Heir Ivy Lancaster is unjustly removed from Alara Systems or denied transparent protection procedures, ownership and management of industrial parcel number 0187 in Mountain View, valued at an estimated $15 million at the time of signing, shall be fully and permanently transferred to Ivy Lancaster for her discretionary use. I read that passage again and again as if each reading uncovered a new layer of meaning. Industrial Parcel 0187. That was where my father laid the foundation for the first warehouse when Alara was still just a blank whiteboard in an old garage. Where I used to sit and draw electronic circuits on cardboard boxes. Where I once asked him, "Dad, do you think we'll make it?" And he just smiled, eyes far away. Every great company starts with dust. I called Alicia first thing the next morning. Her calm voice answered as usual. "I'll check the legal validity, but if the will is authenticated, that property is yours." I was silent for a few seconds. "I don't want to build offices." "Planning to sell it?" I shook my head, though she couldn't see it. "I plan to turn it into a place where those drained by this tech industry can breathe again." Alicia was quiet for a moment, then softly said, "You mean a support center?" "I mean a space that should have existed long ago. Where people can recover after being unfairly fired, manipulated, used as tools. No grand speeches needed. Just enough peace so they don't feel invisible." I spent the next 2 weeks working with a team of architects who had designed community libraries in Oregon. I asked them to keep the old warehouse structure intact. No decorations, no concrete. Just open up the space, add natural light, native plants, and a sound recording room where anyone could share their story. I met George again, the accountant Madeline had pressured to sign, at a small cafe in Menlo Park. He looked older than I remembered, mostly gray hair, hands trembling slightly as he held his teacup. But when I told him about the center, he smiled, the first time since that meeting. "Robert once said," he said, eyes distant, "if his daughter ever got that land, she'd know how to use it right." I stayed silent, holding on to that moment like a blessing. 3 months later, the once dusty plot had become an open garden with wooden walkways, half-open canopies, and oak benches. Enough for someone to sit alone in the wind without feeling lonely. Above the gate hung a bronze plaque that read, "The Quiet Grounds, for those who need to be seen." On opening day, I didn't hold a grand ribbon-cutting ceremony. I simply wrote a short letter, personally addressed, to every former Alara employee laid off in the past 10 years, asking one question: "Do you need a place to start over?" And they came. No fanfare. No banners. Just hesitant steps, skeptical eyes, then slowly trust. Some brought notebooks, others silence. Both were welcomed equally. A middle-aged woman, once a software engineer, approached me late on that first afternoon. She gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "You don't know what you've done, Ivy. You just gave us back something this industry has stolen for too long: decency." I said nothing. Just nodded, looking up at the oak canopy swaying in the breeze. Where once there was raw concrete, now stood a small stone sculpture. Faceless, only shaped like two open hands, lifting and supporting. And I understood that what my father left me wasn't land, wasn't shares, but the power to choose my own value. And I chose to start again, believing that kindness can also be a form of strength. That morning, no one hurried in the hallway on the 20th floor as usual. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling shone steadily, but no eyes dared meet mine. Every sound seemed trapped behind the frosted glass walls of the boardroom. I entered, holding only a note in my father's brown leather journal. No secretary. No assistants. I chose a seat near the end of the table, quietly flipping a page, letting the noise in the room find its own pause. David Grayson stood at the head of the table, looking more serious than usual. Based on the internal audit results, confirmed audio recordings, and financial documents extracted from the offshore account, the board recommends suspending Madeline Rhodes's executive rights under Section 14.2 of the founding shareholder bylaws. No one objected. Not even a question. The first vote was raised by Mrs. Everly, the woman Madeline had brought from New York to handle communications. Then Elliot from the strategy department, followed by others. 4 seconds later, the count was recorded. 15 in favor, 1 abstention, 0 against. I still said nothing. Madeline sat silently, hands gripping the armrests until her knuckles whitened. She tried to stay calm, but her throat twitched when David moved on to the second part of the announcement. Due to the seriousness of the actions and the origin of the funds linked to an international organization, the board unanimously agreed to refer the case to the Federal Financial Investigation Bureau for examination of money laundering, financial fraud, and embezzlement of welfare funds. Madeline stood abruptly. This is a systematic witch hunt. I won't be trapped by the so-called legacy of a deceased person. I looked up, meeting her gaze. This isn't about my father. This is about everyone you've used and discarded like trust was a disposable item. She glanced at the board, then back at me. I will sue. For unfair and blind removal. I'll take this all to court. David silently placed a thin file on the table, then opened it. Clause 6C, a supplement to the founding will, clearly states, any executive who files a malicious lawsuit against a founding partner or knowingly involves themselves in wrongdoing automatically forfeits all undistributed shares. Accompanied by a binding waiver of retroactive claims if found guilty of serious ethical violations. Madeline's face hardened, then paled with each word. That means, she stammered. It means if you sue, David continued, and lose, you will not only lose executive rights but all remaining shares with no right to renegotiate under any circumstances. The room felt so heavy that even the soft rustle of paper turned audible. Madeline slowly stepped back, eyes almost empty. Brad, sitting 3 chairs away, said nothing. His back slumped slightly as if avoiding his own shadow. I spoke no more. When David declared the meeting adjourned and the transition process would begin within 72 hours, I just stood, closed my father's journal and walked out. No one followed. No applause. No drums. I didn't take the CEO position with glory or a welcome banner. I simply returned to where I belonged, but this time with a role powerful enough to change how the company saw itself. 3 days later, I declined the offer to move into the executive office on the 20th floor. Instead, I chose a small room on the 3rd floor where my father had worked his final years, with an oak desk still marked by old ink stains, and a family photo hung slightly off-center. I brought in an old leather chair, a small coffee maker, and a lavender plant he once grew on the balcony. Every morning I open the window, letting the breeze bring in the scent of morning sun and wood, then turn on my computer, starting with unanswered emails, stalled projects, and forgotten people. One late afternoon, a technician named Nate came in carrying files. His eyes often looked downward, voice hesitant. When he handed me the documents, he quietly said, "You're not like the others who sat in that chair." I smiled, not denying. I'm not here to be like them. I didn't come here to be another Madeline. I came to rewrite what they thought impossible: culture, transparency, and trust. And I would start from this small room, the very place my father silently laid the first bricks for it. That morning, the sky was soft like a thin silk fabric. White clouds drifted lazily across the light green early autumn background, and sparrows chirped somewhere from the willow trees at the end of the road leading to the park. Evan held my hand, walking slowly beside me, his tiny sneakers gliding over the new paving stones, his eyes bright as if trying to guess what special thing was waiting ahead. "What are we doing here, Mom?" Evan asked, his voice clear, the last word drawn out just like every time he was curious. I squeezed his hand gently and smiled. "I want to show you a place where a lot of things started that you've never known." We walked past a low stone wall covered in green moss and lavender bushes. The small magnolia trees planted just a few weeks ago were already sprouting new leaves. The scent of damp earth mixed with flowers made the air so fresh it made you want to stop and just breathe. As we turned the first bend, Evan froze. Before him was an open space stretching out with soft grass, and at the center stood a simple stone sculpture. Unadorned, just the shape of a pair of open hands, no face, no name. Below it was a shiny bronze plaque freshly installed just yesterday. I knelt beside Evan, wrapping my arm around his shoulder, pointing to the engraved words, "For the forgotten and for those who have never been heard." Evan read slowly, then looked up at me. "Is it for Grandpa?" I nodded, my throat tightening a bit. "And for everyone like him. Those who believed in kindness in silence. yet were forgotten amid the noise of power. He didn't ask more, just bowed his head for a long moment, then suddenly pulled a small cardboard box from his backpack. I made this for Grandpa. At school, my teacher said everyone should draw a place that makes them feel peaceful. I opened the box. Inside was a small model. A park made of cardboard, magnolia trees drawn with crayons, the sculpture of hands and bronze plaque, all roughly cut and glued but full of effort. I put my hand on his shoulder, holding that moment like a precious breath. You know, I said, some things can't be bought with power nor demanded by shouting. They can only be kept with persistence and kindness. Evan looked up at me, his eyes shining with a thought a 9-year-old can't easily name. So you've gotten everything back? I smiled, a fleeting smile mixed with both sunshine and shadow. I didn't take back power. I just took back my voice. And I won't let anyone cut me off. I thought of the third-floor room where I still sit every morning, where the scent of peppermint tea my father once brewed lingers, where the window opens onto the old tree-lined street. I thought of George, who began volunteering at the recovery center in this park, listening to each person tell the story of their hurt and how they moved forward. I thought of the handwritten thank you letters arriving every week from those unfairly laid off, now returning as advisors, coaches, or simply gardeners at the center. They don't need titles. They just need a place where they don't have to bow their heads. And I thought of my father. I pictured him standing somewhere in the garden, hands in his coat pockets, eyes smiling softly like every time I said something that surprised him. Not because I was smart, but because I was brave enough to be different. Mom, Evan whispered, pulling me from my thoughts. I think Grandpa is listening. I nodded, saying nothing more. We stood up, I held his hand, and we walked slowly along the park path. Fresh grass brushed our feet and soft sunlight rolled over my shoulders. No one needs applause for standing up after loss. But sometimes, a glance, a place to return to, a sentence not interrupted, that's what keeps a person moving for a lifetime. And now I have that. Not on paper, not in financial reports. But in my heart, in every step of those who seemed forgotten. I squeezed my son's hand. Let's go. We have much to do. Evan nodded, then ran ahead, his laughter echoing through the peaceful space like a gentle song. I watched his silhouette, relieved and steady, just like the journey I took to bring him here. What do you think of my choice? Of not retaliating with loud strikes, but with quiet persistence and healing? If you've ever felt pushed aside, forced to stay silent when you should be heard, please share your story. I believe everyone has a voice worthy of respect. Thank you for staying with me through the final steps of this journey. And if this story touched you even a little, don't forget to subscribe to follow along as I explore more slices of life, family, and the quiet fighters preserving what's right. Because sometimes, it's the quiet stories that move us the deepest. See you in the next story.